Please don't think of this as an ending.
For most people, it's the reason everything before it finally makes sense.
The moving truck groaned like an old animal the last half-mile into town. I had been watching the map the way you watch a monitor in a hospital waiting room, too closely, as if my attention could change the outcome. The highway had bled into a two-lane road, then into a narrower strip of asphalt, with no shoulder and trees that leaned inward, their branches knitting together overhead. The sun was still up, but it had that late-day thickness to it, like someone had stirred dust into the air. A sign appeared in the headlights of the truck, even though it wasn't dark yet. Welcome to Holland Glen. Or maybe it was Hollow Glen. The paint had faded, and the bulbs that outlined the letters were uneven, 1 in every 6 dead. The O in the middle didn't light at all. Beneath it, nailed slightly crooked, another sign. A friendly community, since 1893. The driver, a sweating man with a crew cut and a nicotine rasp, spat out his window and said, "This your place?" "Yeah," I said, but it came out like a question. He laughed once, not unkindly. "Better be. Ain't another turn-off for a while." I glanced back at the U-Haul's cargo box, my whole life stacked inside it in uneven towers. Boxes with thick, black marker labels. There was a point on every move, where your things became less like possessions and more like proof. Proof you existed somewhere else before. Proof you had a history. The truck rattled over a set of tracks that weren't marked with any kind of crossing gate, just a rusty crossbuck with its paint flaking off. Past that, the town opened in a way that felt staged. A main street with angled parking, storefronts with big windows, and a handful of street lamps that looked as if they had been installed in a different century. There was a video store, not a converted boutique with a novelty sign. An actual video store with a sun-bleached display in the window, 2 cardboard cutouts, one missing an arm, both smiling at nobody. The letters above the door said, "GLEN Video" in red plastic that had faded into pink. I didn't realize I had been holding my breath until I exhaled and tasted something dry. "Jesus," I murmured. The driver must have heard me, because he glanced in the rearview mirror. "A lot of towns got those still," he said. Then, like he was repeating something he had been told, "They like it that way. Keeps kids out of trouble." I wanted to ask what he meant by they, but the house came into view at the end of a street lined with maples and telephone poles. The poles were thick with stapled flyers, yard sales, missing cats, church potlucks. Some of the paper looked new, white against the dark wood. Some of it had been layered over older paper until the edges curled like bark. My rental was a modest, one-story home, with a wide front porch and a swing that hung from chains. The paint was a pale yellow that might have been cheerful in a different light. In the late afternoon it looked like something left too long in the sun. The yard was trimmed, edged, cared for in the way people care for things they don't love, but don't want judgment for. A woman stood on the front porch as if waiting for the bus. She was maybe late 40s, early 50s, with brown hair in a tight bun, in a cardigan that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. She held a clipboard. Of course she did. It made her look official in a way no uniform could. Clipboard said, "I am used to being listened to." As we pulled up, she smiled and lifted her hand in a small, practiced wave. The driver killed the engine. The sudden quiet made the world feel like it had been muted. "Looks like you got company," he said. "I guess," I said, and climbed down from the cab. The air smelled like freshly cut grass and something faintly metallic, hot engine cooling maybe, or the rail tracks back there. or just the way summer turned sharp at the edges when the sun started to lower. The woman stepped down 2 steps, not all the way. She left herself elevated, which was subtle, but I noticed it anyway. "Hi," she called, her voice bright enough to be heard across a football field. "You must be Evan." My stomach did a small, stupid flip. I hadn't been called Evan by a stranger in weeks. In the city, you were Sir, or Hey, or nothing at all. Names were for people who had earned them. "Yes," I said. "That's me?" "I'm Marlene," she said, and then added, as if it were part of her title, "Welcome, committee." I glanced around reflexively, like I'd see others emerge from the bushes with matching cardigans. There was only her, the porch, the empty seat, and the sound of a lawn mower somewhere far off. "That's nice," I said. Marlene descended the last 2 steps and came closer. She didn't offer to shake my hand, but she also didn't stand too far away. She hovered at an exact distance that felt studied. "We like to greet new residents right away," she said. "Helps you settle in. Helps you feel..." She paused, smile widening, as if she had found the perfect word. "Held." Held was not a word I expected to hear from a stranger. It had weight, fingers, pressure. "Okay," I said, and tried to make my voice match her friendliness. "Well, I appreciate it." Behind me, the driver slammed the cab door and started toward the back of the truck. I was grateful for the noise. Marlene's eyes flicked to him and then back to me. "Are you unloading tonight?" she asked. "Some," I said. "I'm not sure how much we'll get through before..." I stopped. There was no we. It was just me. I'd almost lied out of habit. "Before it gets dark." "It does get dark early here," she said, nodding as if confirming something from her clipboard. "Trees, less light pollution. You'll see the stars beautifully if you like that sort of thing." Marlene turned her clipboard toward herself and made a small mark. The pen clicked loudly in the quiet. "Now," she said, "I have your packet." "Packet," I repeated. "Yes," she said, as if it were obvious. "Orientation, schedules, local contacts, emergency services, trash days." She said trash days, the way people said birthdays, like something to look forward to. She reached down beside the porch steps. I hadn't noticed the basket at first. It was wicker, big enough to hold a small dog, and it was lined with a red and white check cloth like a picnic blanket. Inside were jars, cans, a loaf of bread wrapped in plastic, and a folded dish towel. Someone had tucked in a small bouquet of flowers that looked too perfect to be from a yard. On top of everything sat a VHS tape in a black sleeve. The label was handwritten in neat block letters. "Welcome to the community. Please watch tonight." My mouth went dry again. "I'm sorry," I said, because my brain always reached for politeness first. "Do you mean, like, a video?" Marlene beamed. "Yes. We put it together ourselves. It answers most of the questions people have when they're new. It's easier than trying to remember everything, and then calling the wrong number at the wrong time." "I don't have a VCR," I said automatically. The lie came out too fast. I did have a VCR, technically. An old combo TV/VCR I had kept because it played some tapes my father had made when I was a kid. It was in a box somewhere in the truck. I hadn't planned to unpack it anytime soon. It felt like a relic, something from an era that had ended without telling anyone. Marlene didn't blink. "Oh," she said, still smiling. "Most people do. But if you don't, that's all right. We have options. We can lend you one. Or you can come by the community center and watch there. We have a very comfortable viewing room. Viewing room. Like a dental office. Actually, I think I might have an old one I could use. I'll try to find it," I said. This felt closer to the truth without being a confession. "Wonderful," she said, and the way she said it made it sound like the correct answer on a test. She lifted the basket with both hands as if presenting it. It wasn't heavy, but she held it carefully, like it mattered. I took it from her. The wicker dug into my palms. The tape sleeve was cool against my thumb. "Thank you," I said. "You're very welcome," she replied, and then her smile softened into something almost maternal. "We're glad you're here, Evan." There it was again, that odd sense of being claimed in a sentence. The driver called my name from the back of the truck. "Where do you want to start?" I flinched, not at the question, but at the way my name seemed to travel so far in the still air, like it could be heard blocks away. "Living room," I called back. Then to Marlene, quieter. "Sorry, moving." "Oh, I know," she said, and there was no judgment in her tone, just certainty. "It's a big day." She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "A few small things," she said. "We ask new residents to keep their porch light on the first 3 nights. It helps people know you're home if you need anything. And it discourages mischief." She wrinkled her nose slightly on the last word. "Mischief," I echoed, trying to keep it casual. "Teenagers," she said, and waved the word away like a gnat. "Mostly harmless. You'll see." She stepped back to her exact distance again, clipboard hugged to her chest. "And there's a little meet and greet this Friday at 7, she continued. "Town hall. Nothing fancy. Just coffee and some finger foods. You'll come, of course." It wasn't phrased like a question. "Yeah," I said. "Sure." Another tick on the clipboard. Marlene's gaze drifted past me, toward the street. For a second, her smile thinned, like something behind it had shifted. Then she looked back, bright again. "I won't keep you," she said. "You have a home to unpack." Home. Another heavy word, placed gently like a blanket. She turned to go, then paused at the bottom step. "Oh," she said, as if she had forgotten something delightful. "If you have any trouble with the tape, let me know. Sometimes they can be a little fussy." "Okay," I said. Marlene nodded once, satisfied, and then briskly walked down the street. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She walked like someone who knew exactly where they were going and exactly what would happen when she got there. I stood on the driveway holding the basket. The flowers bobbed slightly in the breeze. The VHS label caught the light. Behind the house, somewhere down the street, a television flickered in a window. It was bright blue, the color of an input screen with no signal. I could see it even in the daylight, a rectangle of artificial sky. The driver came up beside me, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Who's the lady?" he asked. "Welcome committee," I said. He snorted. "Fancy." "Yeah," I said, staring at the tape. He leaned closer and read the label. His face tightened for a moment. Just a twitch near his mouth, then smoothed over. "Huh," he said, and straightened. "Well, I guess they do things differently out here." He clapped me on the shoulder, hard enough to jostle the basket, and went back to the truck. I carried the basket inside. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood, the kind of smell meant to communicate cleanliness rather than comfort. The living room was empty except for the carpet and a pair of beige curtains drawn halfway. Light came through in stripes, cutting the room into light and dull bands. As I took a step closer, I noticed something on one of the curtains. Its beige fabric, otherwise spotless, held a faint, irregular shadow near the bottom hem, like a bruise seen through skin. It wasn't fresh, not anymore, but it had once been dark, I was sure of it. The fibers were worn thin, scrubbed harder than the rest, as if someone had worked at it again and again, unwilling to accept that whatever had soaked in would never come all the way out. I went into the kitchen and set the basket on the counter. The jars clinked softly. Up close, I could see the tape sleeve had been reused. Under the label, faintly visible, was another title written in different handwriting, partly scrubbed away. ATION 19. Orientation maybe, or celebration, or something else. My fingers hovered over the plastic flap. I didn't open it yet. I told myself there was nothing strange about a town giving newcomers information on a tape. Maybe they were proud. Maybe they didn't trust the internet. Maybe the town had bad service. It was quaint, that was all. Quaint. Outside, the street stayed quiet. The lawnmower droned on somewhere, relentless, like someone sanding down a rough edge. I looked at the porch light switch by the front door. I left it off. Not because I was trying to rebel, just because it was still daylight, and the idea of being visible on purpose made my skin tighten. In the kitchen, the VHS tape waited in its sleeve, patient. The first night passed quietly enough that I almost felt embarrassed for how tightly wound I had been. I slept on a mattress on the floor, sheets still smelling faintly of cardboard and dust. Outside, something chirred steadily, not quite crickets, not quite frogs. The sound threaded its way into my dreams until I woke just before dawn, heart racing for no clear reason, convinced I had missed an alarm. There was no alarm, just the dim blue lights seeping through the curtains. The world paused between night and morning. I lay there listening. No traffic, no sirens, no distant hum of a highway. The quiet wasn't empty, it was maintained, like a room people had recently left but planned to return to. When I finally got up, I noticed the porch light was still off. I stood there for a moment, hand hovering near the switch, thinking of Marlene's smile and the way she had phrased it. We ask, not you must, not it's required, just a request dressed in friendliness. I flipped the light on.
The bulb flickered once before settling into a steady glow, pale even in daylight. It made the porch look staged, like a model home.
I spent the morning unpacking the essentials. Kitchen stuff first, bathroom, clothes. The box with the VCR sat unopened near the TV stand. The cardboard had softened from age and previous moves. I told myself I would get to it later. By noon, there was a knock at the door. It was light but precise. 3 taps, evenly spaced. When I opened it, a man stood on the porch, holding a covered casserole dish. He was tall, maybe early 60s, with white hair combed neatly back, and a polo shirt tucked into his pressed slacks. He smiled the way people do in church lobbies. "Evan," he said, like a greeting and confirmation all at once. "I'm Richard. Just wanted to stop by and say hello." "Hi," I said. Thanks." He handed me the dish. It was heavier than I expected. "Chicken tetrazzini," he said. "Marlene makes the list, but we all pitch in." "She's very organized," I said carefully. Richard chuckled. "She likes things done properly." Something about the word properly landed with weight. "How are you settling in?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Quiet." "Yes," he agreed. "That's one of our best features." His eyes drifted past me into the house. Just a glance, like taking inventory. They paused, just briefly, on the living room window. "You watched the tape yet?" he asked. There it was. Casual, almost an afterthought. "Not yet," I said. "I just got everything in." "No rush," he said quickly, too quickly. "Tonight is fine. We just like everyone to have the same information." "Of course," I said. Richard nodded, satisfied, and took a small step back. "Well," he said, "welcome again. If you need anything, tools, directions, help with the TV reception, just ask." "I appreciate it." He smiled once more and turned to leave. Halfway down the steps, he stopped and looked back. "Oh," he said. "Trash pickup is Thursday mornings. Bins need to be at the curb by 6. 6? I repeated. "Sharp," he said, and smiled like it was a joke. After he left, I closed the door and locked it, though I couldn't have said why. I set the casserole in the fridge next to the jars from the basket, all neatly labelled in the same handwriting. Tomatoes, peaches, green beans. None of them had expiration dates. By mid-afternoon, I had met 4 more people. They came one at a time, spaced just far enough apart that it didn't feel coordinated, though I could not shake the sense that it was. A woman with a toddler that stared at me. An older couple who spoke in tandem, finishing each other's sentences. A teenage boy who handed me a flyer for the meet and greet. Every one of them asked about the tape. Every one of them phrased it slightly differently. "Did you get a chance to watch it yet? You'll find it helpful. It answers things you don't even know to ask." By the time evening came, the question had worn a groove in my head. I made a sandwich for dinner and ate it standing up. Outside, porch lights blinked on, one by one along the street, like a slow wave. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, every house was lit, except one, 2 doors down. Dark porch, dark windows. I watched it longer than I meant to. Nothing happened. Eventually, a light flicked on inside, then the porch followed, like a correction. I unpacked the VCR. It took longer than it should have. The cords were tangled, the coaxial cable stubborn. When I finally slid the unit onto the shelf beneath the TV, my hands were dusty, and I felt strangely relieved, like I had accomplished something more important than it was. I turned the TV on. Blue screen. The word video blinked in the corner. The tape made a soft clicking sound when I pushed it into the slot, a mechanical acceptance. The machine whirred, louder than I remember VCRs being, then settled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen filled with static, thick and snowy, the sound hissing through the speakers. I reached for the remote, but before I could press anything, the image snapped into place. A wide shot of the town sign, the same one I had driven past yesterday. Except all the bulbs were lit. The paint looked fresh. The sky behind it was overcast, colorless. A woman stepped into frame. She stood too close to the camera, face slightly distorted by the lens. "Welcome," she said, smiling broadly. "We're so glad you're here." The image cut, not smoothly, but with a visible jump, and the shot changed to the main street. The video quality was uneven, colors bleeding at the edges. People waved as they passed, some of them holding grocery bags, some holding hands. I recognized Marlene immediately, though she looked much younger. Her hair was longer, looser. She stood in front of the town hall and spoke with the same bright certainty. "We believe community starts with participation," she said. "When everyone does their part, everyone benefits." The tape continued like that. Landmarks, friendly faces, rules delivered with smiles, quiet hours, lawn maintenance, event attendance. The words participation and together came up often. About 10 minutes in, the image wavered. The tracking slipped, bending the faces sideways before snapping back. For a split second, the audio dropped out completely. When it returned, the narrator's voice sounded closer. "Some traditions may seem unusual at first," she said. "That's natural, but they've served us well." I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. The timestamp in the corner flickered. It read 1997, then 2003, then dissolved into static before settling again. I checked the clock on the VCR. It blinked 12 a.m., as it always did, refusing to be set. The tape went on. At some point I realized I was being addressed directly, not by name, not exactly, but the camera lingered on empty spaces, the porch of my house, the corner of my street, as if anticipating me there. Near the end, the screen glitched again. This time the distortion lingered. Faces froze mid-smile, eyes blurred into dark smudges. The audio crackled. "We're so glad you chose us," the narrator said, her voice warping slightly, stretched thin. "And we're glad you'll choose to stay." The image cut to black. The tape clicked loudly as it rewound itself. I sat back, heart thudding, the room quiet. It wasn't exactly threatening. That was the problem. It was reassuring. It assumed compliance the way gravity assumed down. A knock sounded at the door, destroying the uneasy silence. I jumped, skin prickling. 3 taps, evenly spaced. When I opened it, Marlene stood there again, clipboard tucked under her arm. The porch light cast her face in a soft shadow, smoothing out every line. "Hi," she said warmly. "I just wanted to check in, see how your first day went." "It was busy," I said. She nodded, eyes flicking briefly past me, to the glow of the TV. "And the tape?" she asked gently. I watched it. Her smile deepened, just a fraction. "Good," she said. "That makes things easier." "Easier for who?" I asked, before I could stop myself. Marlene laughed softly, like I had made a joke that almost went too far. "For everyone," she said. "You'll see." She stepped back, already turning away. "Oh, and Evan?" she added. "Yes," I replied. "If the picture ever gets a little fuzzy," she said, "don't worry. Sometimes it takes a while for things to come into focus here." She left before I could ask her what she meant by that. I closed the door and leaned my ear against it, listening to her footsteps fade. Behind me, the TV hummed faintly, the blue screen glowing patiently, as if waiting for the next instruction. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Morning light arrived late, filtered through trees thick enough to blunt the sunlight. I started waking before my alarm, not from noise, but from the absence of it. The town seemed to hold its breath overnight, releasing it only once everyone was awake and visible again. I began to notice how often people were outside at the same times, not gathered, not social, just present. Porches swept at 8:30 on the dot. Mailboxes checked at exactly 9. Lawns watered in overlapping intervals that created a soft, constant hiss along the street. If I stepped outside, someone would already be there, watering, stretching, pretending to be mid-task. We would exchange a nod, a smile, a brief careful conversation that never lingered long enough to deepen. No one ever asked where I had lived before. They asked how the house was treating me, whether the tape had been clear, if I'd had any trouble sleeping, always framed as concern, always delivered with the same gentle expectation that I would answer correctly. On the 3rd day, I noticed the trash bins. I had set mine out early, proud of myself for remembering Richard's instructions. 6 a.m. sharp. The street was lined with identical bins, evenly spaced at the curb like punctuation marks. What struck me wasn't the uniformity, but the contents. Every bin lid sat slightly ajar, just enough that I could see inside as I walked past. No bags were torn, no food scraps visible. Everything looked curated. Flattened boxes tied neatly with twine, rinsed containers, paper stacked and bound. It was recycling day, sure, but it felt rehearsed. Everything here did. Down the block, one bin stood out. Its lid was closed all the way. I slowed without meaning to. The house belonged to a man I had seen twice but never spoken to. Middle-aged, unremarkable. He kept his blinds closed during the day, porch light off at night, until inevitably a neighbor would go knock on his door. This had happened every night I had been here, and every time it was a different neighbor. Every time the door would open, a very brief conversation would be had. Then the neighbor would leave, and the door would close again. As I stood, Fixated on the bin, a woman emerged from the neighboring house, carrying a pair of gloves. She glanced at the closed bin, then at the street, then lifted the lid. She stared inside for a long moment. Then she closed it again, pressed down firmly until it latched, and returned to her house without another look. By noon, the bin was gone. So was the man. I told myself it was a coincidence. People moved, people traveled, people missed trash day and corrected it quietly. None of that was strange on its own. What unsettled me was how no one mentioned it. At the meet and greet on Friday, I waited for his absence to come up in conversation. It never did. Town Hall was a small brick building with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. Folding tables lined the walls, each holding aluminium trays of food and large plastic dispensers of coffee. A corkboard near the entrance displayed flyers identical to the ones on the telephone poles. Same font, same layout, same cheerful clip art. The room smelled like an interesting combination of the various foods, but underneath that was something else. A chemical smell that I couldn't quite place. People greeted me by name, more than I expected. Some I recognized, some I didn't. Marlene hovered near the center of the room, moving with ease, steering conversations, placing hands on shoulders just long enough to feel intimate. When she saw me, she smiled and gave a small nod, like a teacher acknowledging a student who had shown up on time. I made small talk, answered questions, laughed when appropriate. No one asked what I did for work. No one asked why I had moved here. It was as if the before didn't matter, only the now and the staying. At one point, I drifted towards the corkboard, pretending to read flyers more closely. There was a notice titled Community Participation. Below hung a clipboard. Names were listed down the page, dates across the top. Small check marks filled the grid, neat and consistent. I found my name near the bottom. There were already 2 check marks beside it. I didn't remember earning them. Those are just a formality, a voice said behind me. I turned. It was Richard, holding a styrofoam cup of coffee. He smiled, but his eyes flicked quickly to the clipboard and back. Tracks involvement, he continued, helps us make sure no one slips through the cracks. Slips through, I echoed. Gets overlooked, he corrected gently. Everyone here deserves to be accounted for. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. Did you know, Richard said conversationally, that this town used to be much bigger? No, I said. Nearly twice the population once, he went on. Factories mostly. When those closed, people left. But some stayed, I said. Yes, he agreed. Some always do. He sipped his coffee, then smiled again, brighter this time. We learned a lot during that period, he said. About balance. Balance, I repeated, thinking of the bins, the porch lights, the check marks. Yes, he said. You'll understand eventually. That word, eventually, followed me home. That night I dreamed of the VHS tape. In the dream it played on a loop, but each time it restarted, something was missing. A building. A person. A whole block erased cleanly, replaced by static that bled outward until the image corrected itself. I woke with the sense that something had been removed while I slept. The next morning, I went to the library. It was small, attached to the back of the town hall like an afterthought. The librarian, a woman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looked up when I entered and smiled with the same cheerful warmth I had come to recognize. Researching? She asked. Just curious, I said. She nodded approvingly. That's how it starts. I spent an hour flipping through old newspapers on microfilm. The machine whirred loudly. Articles blurred together. Bake sales, school plays, ribbon cuttings. I searched for obituaries. There were fewer than there should have been. Years would pass with only one or two listed, sometimes none at all. When deaths were mentioned, the language was vague. Passed on, moved on. No longer with us. Names appeared once and then never again. I checked property records next. Houses changed ownership frequently, sometimes yearly, sometimes sooner. Always listed as private sales. No prices recorded. One address appeared over and over. My address. I printed the page before I could talk myself out of it. As I left the library, the librarian called out to me. "Evan," she said, and waited until I turned back. "If you're looking for context, the tapes help." "The tapes?" I repeated. She smiled. They always do. That evening, a second VHS tape appeared on my porch. No knock, just the tape, centered neatly on the welcome mat. The label read, Supplemental Orientation. I stood there for a long time, keys in hand, listening to the quiet street. Porch lights glowed up and down the block. Across the way, a curtain shifted slightly, then stilled. Inside, I slid the tape onto the counter beside the first. I noticed then that the first tape sleeve had been updated. A small sticker had been added to the corner, a check mark. I didn't watch the second tape right away. Instead, I sat in the living room with the TV off, the house settling around me. The faint stain on the curtain caught the lamplight again, just visible enough to remind me it was there. I tried to imagine what it had looked like before, how dark it must have been, how long someone worked to erase it. Outside, footsteps passed, paused, continued. I told myself that whatever this place was, it ran on consent, on agreement, on people choosing to stay. At least that was what I needed to believe. Later, when I finally pressed play, the second tape began, not with smiles or landmarks, but with a diagram, a circle, divided neatly into segments. A voice I did not recognize spoke calmly over it. For the community to remain stable, it said, inputs must equal outputs. The screen flickered. For every addition, the voice continued, there must be a corresponding adjustment. The image cut to static before the sentence finished. I ejected the tape with shaking hands. Outside, the porch light buzzed faintly. Down the street, a house went dark. Just for a moment, before its light snapped back on. Brighter than before. I sat very still, beginning to understand that the town wasn't watching me to see if I would comply. It was watching to see when. They came just after sunset. I knew it was them before the knock. There was a pressure in the air, a sense of things arriving at their proper place in the schedule. When I opened the door, they stood in a neat line on the porch. Marlene in the center, hands folded over her clipboard. Richard to her right, expression calm, almost tender. Two others I recognized from the meet and greet, a woman from the library board and a man who coached the high school basketball team, standing slightly behind them, like witnesses rather than participants. "Evan," Marlene said softly, "may we come in?" She again didn't phrase it like a question, but she waited all the same. I stepped aside. They entered the house with an ease that unsettled me. No one looked around as if curious. No one commented on the unpacked boxes or the faint smell of old electronics. They knew the space already. They had always known it. Marlene gestured towards the living room. "Shall we sit?" she asked. I nodded. We arranged ourselves almost automatically, me on the couch, them in chairs pulled uncomfortably close in. The stained curtain hung behind me, its shadow faint in the lamplight. Marlene set her clipboard aside and interlocked her fingers. "Thank you for watching the supplemental tape," she said. "I didn't finish it," I replied. "That's all right," she said. You weren't meant to. Not yet. Richard leaned forward slightly. We wanted to speak with you in person, he said, because this part matters. I waited. The silence stretched, deliberate. Finally, Marlene spoke again. Holland GLEN functions on balance, she said. You've already learned that much. I nodded. For a community to remain stable, truly stable, it must control for loss, she continued. Illness, age, decline, descent, the kinds of things that slowly erode quality of life. We don't let those things fester, Richard added. We address them. How? I asked, though I already felt the shape of the answer pressing in. Marlene smiled, gentle and patient. By replacement, she said. The word sat between us, plain and terrible in its simplicity. She went on, as if explaining a town ordinance. When a resident reaches a point where they can no longer contribute in the way the community requires, when their needs begin to outweigh their participation, we prepare for a transition. Transition, I repeated. Yes, she said. No one is taken by surprise. No one is forced. The woman from the library spoke for the first time. Consent is essential, she said quietly. Without understanding, there is no benefit. Benefit, I echoed. Richard smiled. You've noticed it, haven't you? He said. The safety, the quiet, the lack of want. I thought of the clean streets, the full shelves at the store, the way nothing here seemed to decay unless it was meant to. The town provides, Marlene said, healthcare, housing, security, purpose. People here live longer, healthier lives than they would anywhere else. And in exchange? I asked. In exchange, she said, we maintain equilibrium. My pulse thudded in my ears. You bring in new residents, I said slowly. People like me. Yes, Marlene said. People who are looking for something better. And they... My voice caught. They replace someone else. Richard nodded. One in, one out. And if someone says no, I asked. Marlene didn't hesitate. Then they leave, she said. We help them pack. We wish them well. And someone else takes their place? Yes, she said gently. The balance must be maintained. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. So you just kill people? The word hung heavy in the room. Marlene's expression softened. No, she said. We complete a cycle. She reached down and picked up a black VHS tape from her bag, setting it carefully on the coffee table. The final tape explains it better than we ever could, she said. It's important you see it. My stomach turned. This isn't... I began. You can't just... We aren't asking you to decide anything tonight, Richard said quickly. Understanding comes first. The others rose from their chairs, movements synchronized, without being obvious. We'll give you time, Marlene said. But not too much. Uncertainty is unkind. She paused at the door. Oh, and Evan, she added, almost kindly. Please don't think of this as an ending. For most people, it's the reason everything before it finally makes sense. They left as quietly as they had come. I stood there for a long moment after the door closed, staring at the tape on the table. Its label was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. Final orientation. My hands shook as I loaded it into the VCR. The screen filled with static, then cleared. The image resolved into my living room. Not a living room. This one. The same walls, the same window, the same curtain. Except the curtain was clean. No stain, no shadow. Plastic sheeting covered the floor, the couch, the chairs. Everything wrapped tightly, crinkling faintly, as someone off-screen adjusted the camera. An elderly man sat in the center of the frame. 70s maybe. Thin hair combed carefully, hands folded in his lap. He wore a sweater I owned, one I hadn't unpacked yet. My breath caught. His face was mine, not exactly. Time had worn it down, softened the angles, carved lines where mine were still smooth, but the bones were the same, the eyes, the mouth. It was uncanny. He smiled, and I felt something cold bloom in my chest. "Hello, Evan," the man said. He spoke calmly, warmly, like this was a favor. "If you're watching this, then you're where you need to be." The man shifted slightly in his chair, the plastic beneath him crackling. "I know this is difficult to understand at first," he continued. "I struggled too, but I want you to listen to me carefully." He leaned forward. "This place gave me a life I wouldn't have had otherwise. Stability, safety, years I wasn't promised anywhere else." He chuckled softly. "I watched my children grow up here. I never worried about bills, about crime, about being alone." He gestured around the room. "All of this," he said, "was worth it." My throat tightened. "I won't pretend I don't know how this ends," he said. "But knowing doesn't diminish what came before. If anything, it gives it shape." He smiled again, sad but sincere. "Community requires sacrifice," he said, "but it also gives meaning, and meaning is everything." A hand entered the frame. It held a gun. The man didn't flinch. He only nodded once, as if giving approval. The trigger was pulled.
The sound was different. The man's head snapped back. Blood sprayed across the plastic in a violent red bloom. A smaller, darker splatter struck the curtain behind him, right where the faint stain now hung in my living room. The tape cut flat. The VCR whirred softly as it rewound itself. I sat frozen, the echo of the gunshot ringing in my ears, staring at the curtain behind me. At the stain, small, dark, permanent. Outside, the torchlight flowed steadily up and down the street, calm as ever.